Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. Again, we're still experimenting with the sound, so hopefully it sounds really good. Tonight what we're going to do is just go over some more of the general prophecies for our time period, look at a few things in light of the upcoming war, the one being finished and the one coming up, and a few other things. So I wanted to start off by talking about let's see here if I've got a hold of that. Okay, I'm kind of getting ready for this. So in August, we want to start our prophecy study. And we're going to at least focus on the first section, which is this one right here. The way I've got it here is the first two sections, but the calendar and the dates, 32 AD, 1948, 1967, and 2026. And this is just something I threw together. I know there's spelling errors and stuff on it, but basically what I thought we would do is start off, because nobody ever does this. Everybody speculates on when or what or anything like that. There are just a handful of timed prophecies where a date happens, and sometimes something happens on that date, or at least something happens on that date. And then 99% of the prophecies don't have a date with them. They just say sometime this thing occurs. And then if it's specific enough, you can kind of figure out it's coming because it's this country or that war or something like that. So these are the kinds of things we want to go over and look on, especially Gaza and Lebanon. Compare Daniel's empires with Noah's empires and do these things. So a lot of people ask, what year is it? How close are we to the end of the age? What are the ages? Things like that. And then how did we get the prophecy of 32 AD? All these are from, 32, 48, and 67 are from Daniel, the biblical book Daniel. And 2026 is one from a Dead Sea Scroll. And there's a few other things that might be date prophecies, but it's kind of hard to figure out. But these things are pretty solid. And we're going to go through and look at those things. So with that in mind, we're having our Bible study tonight. The next week, see if I can see this on here. Okay, so next week is the 5th of August, and our family is having a new grandbaby. Actually, Thursday, the baby will be born. So it'll be pretty cool to have. So the 5th and the 6th, we're not going to have. The 6th, of course, is going to be our Bible study at our normal home. Normally, we do a broadcast on Mondays and then have a Bible study at home connected with our church. And to remind you guys, I go to Calvary Chapel, Johnson County, which is in Olathe, Kansas. So I'm a Calvary Chapel guy. But anyway, so the 5th and 6th, we won't be having a broadcast or a Bible study. So just to let you know, so we can kind of recuperate and get back to normal. So we should start with the 12th right here. And the 12th, we should be able to start up our studies. And I'm assuming this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, or maybe 4 weeks to put all this together. But I wanted to hit these separately because I would like to have hopefully small 20-minute studies. But some people will say, oh, I know all about AD 32 from Daniel chapter 9. I want to know about 48 or 67 and how that connects to the overall scheme of things, which would be the calendar. So we're going to start with that stuff there next in the next couple of weeks. Just wanted to kind of do that. Another exciting thing that we're doing, and I think most of you know, we started our network, which is kind of like a private Facebook type thing, so we won't get in trouble for talking about Christian stuff. We started that almost 2 years ago, I think, year and a half ago. And sometime thereafter, my daughter-in-law, Kendra, came to work with us. And she's been phenomenal in helping us get those things together. And a lot of you that write questions in know her very well. Last month, our son came on board with us. So we are beginning to do several new things that I don't really have time for or until now. So one of the things we're wanting to do is create a second channel. And the main channel will not change. It's going to be just like it is now. It's going to be in-depth studies. But the second channel would be just the videos of the text. So many times you can go to like query King James Version or NASB or something like that, and somebody will have the Bible and it'll be up like this, whatever verse starting at Genesis 1:1, and you'll be able to read it and listen to it. We want to do that with the scrolls and the church fathers. So these are the projects that he's working on. And so right now we're just calling it public manuscripts. So for instance, my book on Gad, and I think that was the first translation in English of that particular scroll. But if you get the book, it's 140 pages, and that's translation with commentary. If you just look at the commentary, it's 40 pages. So quite a bit of a difference. I just rattle off too much. But so in this case, we're going to take the text of Gad and just put it up just like we were doing Genesis 1 through the end of the book. So here are the chapters, here's the marks, things like that. Most of these are kind of small. Some of them are anyway. So we're thinking about doing one video and using the timestamps to separate the chapters. And then if you want to, you can just listen to the whole book too. So that would be good. So no commentary on that particular channel, just the scrolls. So we're going to start with Gad and then Barnabas for a church history one. So let me show you that. If we go to Bible Facts, here's our main website, biblefacts.org. We also have dsscalendar.org, where we have all the calendar, date, prophecy type studies. But if you come down here, we've had Bible Facts YouTube, that's our main channel. And then this new channel here, which is manuscripts. So if you go here to the main channel, this is what we're doing now live, and I'm sure you've seen this before. But down at the bottom, we have this channel and then this channel here. So there's two different ways of getting to it. So if you click on this, this is all we have here now, but same thing, the main channel, secondary channel. What we will have again is in this first one, just Gad, and then Enoch, and then some testaments, just the text, no commentary. So you can go through here. We should be able to create a playlist where you can just turn it on and just listen to it. And it would go through all the things that we have. So for church fathers, we'll have Barnabas and 3 Corinthians and things like that. For the studies on where in the world did 3 Corinthians come from? Is it legitimate? What's in it? You know, how do we interpret it? Those are all studies that we would do, and those would be on the main channel. But when you just want to go through the entire book, you can listen to it. I had one lady write in and said she really liked the Enoch study that we did on the main channel, but we didn't go through every single chapter. And so this is what this would be. This Enoch playlist, once we get it going, we'll have all the chapters, just the text, no commentary. So right now they're just kind of placeholders in there. But for this to work, we need, I think it's 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours, something like that. And then we can monetize this. It will help the ministry. And I know there's places that you can go and look at, or listen to, like Jubilees and Enoch specifically. And sometimes there's at least part of Jasher out there. But I wanted to create one place where we would have a good translation of all those, just so we can do that. So if you want to, you can subscribe there. Don't unsubscribe. We're not going to get rid of the first channel. This is our main channel for teaching, and this would be just for those. So we're kind of excited to do this. I think it's going to be really, really cool. So we are working on those particular things. So let me see. Let me get out of these. And what I wanted to share with you today, as part of the prophecy studies, we know what's going on. There's a war with Israel and Hamas at the moment, or Gaza. Hamas is the government structure of Gaza. And we've talked about that before. And then there's going to be a war with they're not, according to the text, especially like Psalm 83 and others, they're not talking about Israel being at war with the nation. So like Egypt or France or whatever. It's a group of people, a terrorist organization in that particular country. And sometimes it is the government, and other times it's not. So in this case, they're not at war with Lebanon, or not about ready to enter a war with Lebanon. they're entering a war with a terrorist group that is in southern Lebanon. So it's that kind of a thing. So there's different things that happen. We've talked a little bit about southern Lebanon, the Gaza Strip, Egypt, Iraq, and we've talked a little bit about Iran. So some of those studies are up on the main channel. But some of the things that we haven't talked about, and I thought this was pretty interesting. I wanted to kind of share a couple of these with you. So this is from our book, Ancient Church Fathers, or the End Times by the Ancient Church Fathers. And what we did in here is just go through, and let me just, I'll come back to here. But up here, we have, it talks about the 6,000 years and how it's divided by the Church Fathers. This is way before we realized the Dead Sea Scrolls taught the same thing. Anyway, then the first century AD people, just some basic quotes because there's not that much from the first century. We did not put in the Didache or other things in here, which are very clearly pre-tribulational. Justin Martyr's another one. And then Irenaeus actually wrote several things in different books that he had. So we took those chapters out. The fact that he's premillennial, pre-trib rapture, the end time, the time of the end when it begins, as far as like with the birth pangs, you know, before the tribulation. No dates per se in that, but the orders. What happens to the Roman Empire, the 10 nations. The Roman Empire, I think, is key to a lot of these prophecies. And a lot of us think that that's all done and over with. It's been over for centuries. And we're looking at the wrong Roman Empire, I think. And he would agree with that. But then the 10 nations, you know, things like that. And then we get into Ephraim, who was a Syrian. And he wrote a book called The End Times. So again, when we do this, we're not going to publish this book per se, but we might publish his End Times work to be a good one to do. So you won't have the commentary, but you can just listen to the text. Anyway, so that, and then we've got Hippolytus on the Antichrist, and then his second work on the end of the world. It's got several of these things in here. So we were up in chapter, let me see where we were here. This one. Okay, and so this is in Hippolytus, the first book, Hippolytus the Antichrist. But I just want to share a couple of things with you because I thought this was interesting. Sometimes you look at this and it's really neat to see that the church fathers all taught, yes, there's going to be a literal 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. That's in the future. Right before that happens, there's a 7-year period with an Antichrist. And these things will happen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And, you know, when you get stuff secondhand, like I'm sure you've heard this all your life with me, but if somebody was to ask you in what order, you might get them out of order. I might get them out of order. So these guys are not authoritative per se, but it's nice for them to all say the same thing. Like for instance, in one place, Justin Martyr says the Antichrist will persecute believers for 2.5 years. And you're thinking, 2.5, it should be 3.5 years. What's going on? Well, in another place in the same book, he says 3.5 years. So it's obviously a typo. In that case, it's not even him getting confused. Somebody somehow managed to put 2.5 instead of 3.5. So those are the kind of things we want to look for. That's not him. That's just typographical errors, but we try to pull these things together as much as we can. So in this case, he's going through, and we're in chapter 51. You get back here. So he's just talked about the two witnesses, the timing of the two witnesses, like when they come, the earth beast and the sea beast explained, in his opinion, what those are, Revelation 13. The number of the beast. So how do you interpret 666? And he talks about that. And then we're in this one. I wanted to share chapter 51 and 52 because they're pretty interesting in light of what's about to occur in the next few weeks and few months. But this first part is about Jordan. Now, we know that biblically, Jordan didn't exist as a whole country, but the area that's right now Jordan, plus a little bit of Saudi Arabia, were 3 countries, and it was Edom, Moab, and Ammon. So those 3 countries comprise that area. But this is what he says here. He's talking about the Antichrist and those things. Back up at the top, he just talked about the number of the beast and how to interpret it. So he's in the midst of all these subjects. And he says, but not to confine ourselves to these words and arguments alone, okay, for the purpose of convincing those who love to study the oracles of God, we shall demonstrate by the matter many proofs. So he's going to continue talking about prophecy. And I think this is the right attitude, the whole idea of if this is real, sometime in the future, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 is going to happen. Maybe I got them in order, maybe I don't, but we need people to understand those things happen. Even to the point of us sounding like my mom would say, you sound like a broken record. It's repeating it over and over again. Peter said the same thing. I want to din this into your mind and basically repeat it so often that when he's gone, somebody's going to say, remember when Peter used to talk? Oh, yeah, I remember very well, over and over and over. But that's how you memorize it. So he's going to talk about this, and we need to do that for the purpose of convincing those who love to study the oracles of God. Many of us love the scriptures, but we're in churches that don't teach premillennialism, that don't teach anything about prophecy. They consider it divisive. So it gets kind of strange that way. So we're going to demonstrate these, he says. For Daniel, he's talking about the prophet Daniel, and he's going to quote Daniel 11:41. It says, for Daniel says, these shall escape out of his hand. In Daniel 11, they're talking about all the wars that the Antichrist is going to do. So this isn't our time, this is in the future. But these shall escape out of his hand. Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. Not the entire area, but the chief of it, the main part. So what's interesting to me is you look at this, well, why would 3 countries escape out of his hand? We don't know exactly why. This is in the first 3.5 years. Whether they sign an alliance and we're talking about they escape destruction, or what it is exactly going on, but there's something special about these 3 countries. Well, today, or more specifically after World War II, these 3 countries were formed together to create what was called Transjordan, the second state of the area of Palestine. There was supposed to be an Israeli Jewish state and a second state called Transjordan. So that's always interesting when they talk about we want a 2-state solution. Well, right now we have a 4-state solution. We have West Bank, Israel, Gaza, and Jordan. So we don't need a 5th one or a 6th one. But anyway, that's just my opinion. But this is talking about, so these shall escape out of his hand. So it's interesting to me that these 3 combined and became a Transjordan, okay? So it goes on and he explains it and says, Ammon and Moab are the children born by Lot by his daughters, and their race survives even now. So there's Moabites and Ammonites back in his day. And Isaiah says about them, so there's actually a prophecy in Isaiah 11 about the children of Lot. They shall fly in boats of strangers, plundering the sea together. They shall spoil them from the east, and they shall lay hands upon Moab first, and the children of Ammon shall first obey them. And this is interesting. There's another place in here. I didn't mark it, but there's another place that talks about when the Antichrist, it's in this book somewhere, one of the quotes. Well, when the Antichrist begins to attack, they're the first to make a commitment or sign a truce or something, the children of Lot. So that was kind of interesting. But anyway, so that's Jordan. So Jordan is formed, and Jordan is still here when the Antichrist comes on the scene. And they do some sort of a peace treaty or something. For some reason, they escape out of his hand, either destruction or because they're on the other side. So many times we look at Ezekiel 38 and we think of Gog and Magog coming down and destroying Russia, and we're all dead. And what people don't usually see is you've got Russia, the Magogites, so Russia, Germany, and those things coming down. And that's one side. And of course, Israel is the other side. They're the ones being attacked, and maybe other groups with them. But the majority is the north. Israel's in the middle. But then there's the west. And the west comprises people that are not going to participate in the war necessarily. That's what it looks like. But they object. So they're still here. They're not pro-Russia. They're anti-Russia in a sense, but they don't really do much. They either can't or choose not to or whatever. But it's the ships of Tarshish. Okay, Tarshish is Britain. We understand that, and we won't cover that tonight, but specifically in Isaiah 60 and 61, it talks about the ships of Tarshish are the ones to bring Israel back to repopulate the land. And that's in the second return. So it wasn't Spain that did it, it was Britain. So it makes it very, very clear who we're talking about. Well, along with Britain then, or England, or the UK, or whatever you want to call it, all those old names, are the cubs of Tarshish. And the way that it's written, it's not necessarily all the cubs together or the majority of cubs. Cub meaning an offspring, which would be like a country they formed or controlled or something like that. But specifically a group of cubs that form something. So in that case, you're probably talking about the 13 colonies that came together and formed something. So you're talking about specifically Britain and America being pro-Israel and anti-Russia, and we either can't for some reason or choose not to do whatever. It doesn't tell us the exact nature of it, but for some reason we're still there and we don't do anything. So that's one of the things that I think is interesting when we have people, I know people that claim to be prophets that'll say, I had a dream and Russia nukes the United States and we're totally destroyed. Well, at least not before they attack Israel, because we're the ones saying, you shouldn't do that. So we're still here. Things that we need to take into account. But so that's Jordan. Now, another thing is we're looking at prophecies about Tyre and Sidon and Lebanon, southern Lebanon. So I want you to see this. This is another thing that Hippolytus says. Basically, Tyre and Beirut fall to the Antichrist. So one of the first places, if not the first place that he invades, is going to be Beirut, Lebanon. I always thought that was interesting. As far back as I can remember, when I first started looking at wars and politics and things like that, back when I was a teenager, Beirut was always having a problem. There's always a war going on. And sometimes, 5 or 10 years, a decade might go by, but then there'd be another war or maybe a continuation of the same one. I didn't understand it. I just knew somehow they were always in the news, So let's look at this. It says, in those times then, and again, we're talking about when the Antichrist works with the children of Lot, and Jordan surrenders, makes a covenant, does something with the Antichrist. In those times then, he shall arise and meet them. And when he has overmastered 3 horns out of the 10, and of course, again, we're talking about the Daniel prophecies of the 10 nations, the Antichrist being the king of an 11th nation, some nation north of Israel, not the United States, obviously, north of Israel. And he destroys 3 of these 10, and that leaves 7, and he becomes the 8th out of that group. And that's when we have the second part, the second half of the tribulation period. So anyway, and so we're seeing, number one, the church fathers, specifically Hippolytus now, is saying that's his interpretation also, same way we've always interpreted. So when the Antichrist, has overmastered 3 horns, or destroyed the 3 horns, taken them over, out of the 10, in the array of war, and has rooted out these, specifically Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. Or Ethiopia at this point is south, anything south of Egypt. So properly, we would probably say Sudan. And then even today, Sudan is divided. It used to be all Ethiopia, then it divided with Sudan and Ethiopia. And then to the north of Ethiopia, between Ethiopia and Egypt, Sudan now has divided, and there's a North Sudan and a South Sudan. So, and who knows what's going to happen, but maybe they'll go back together. I mean, whatever, but that area. And has got their spoils and their trappings, and has brought them to the remaining horns, which suffer into subjection. He will begin to be lifted up in heart and exalt himself against God as master of the whole world. So this is what the Antichrist is going to do. So notice what he says here about this. He's taking the prophecy out of Daniel 11, where it says the king of the north, which would be the Antichrist, is going to attack the king of the south, which is Egypt, and, in process, probably take over Israel. We're all focused on Israel at that point, but it's somebody's north of Israel, somebody's south of Israel. So anyway, he goes down and attacks Egypt, and it specifically says that Libya and Ethiopia will be at his steps. And people have argued or wondered a lot, what does that mean exactly? Well, if I am at your feet, then I am bowing down at your feet, I am surrendering. So that's one thing. If I am at your heels, I'm running after you to kill you. And you're running away from me. I'm chasing you. I'm at your heels. I'm just about ready to catch you. So there's two different idioms, at your heels and at your feet. And this, it's funny though, in this particular case, it says at his steps. Well, does steps mean heels or does it mean feet? How does the idiom work? According to him now, he's saying the Ethiopians or Sudanese, whoever that is, and Libya rises up in league with Egypt to attack the king of the north, which is the Antichrist, and the Antichrist basically subdues all three of these. So these are the three of the 10 nations that get destroyed. So if Hippolytus is correct, we know that it's not large groups of people or ethnic groups or powers, commercial powers. There's been a whole lot of different theories like that. Now, Hippolytus might be wrong. He doesn't tell us where he gets that. He just says, matter of fact, here. So all we're getting from this is that what he believes. He's a premillennial. He's a pre-tribulational guy. He believes there's a 7-year tribulation period right prior to the second coming. He believes in a literal Antichrist and a literal 10 nations. And he comes to war with the 10 nations don't like him at first. And that's interesting too. Everybody says, well, we might as well lay down and not do anything. Don't vote. Don't try to do anything to bring godliness back because it's futile. It's not going to work. Well, maybe in a sense, but we're supposed to occupy till he comes. But in the other sense of this, it's not just us, because the rapture would have happened by then. But we've still got large people, maybe whole nations, maybe freedom fighters, whatever you want to call them, in different places that don't like the Antichrist at all. And that's why it says in the first half of the tribulation period, he goes out making war and many nations fall. He ends up taking over everybody at that point, but that's the tribulation period. And I've often thought what Paul means in 2 Thessalonians about the restrainer is that the Antichrist can't do that because there are too many Christians here. I mean, the whole concept of everybody has rights, the Antichrist or no one can tell you what you can and cannot do. You tell your government what you want them to do. And that's the way we are over here. Now, all of a sudden, the rapture happens and all of the Christians are gone. And we already have a left and a right, liberals and conservatives and strange people and fascists and different groups. And you pull the Christians out of all of that, the government structure is probably going to fall apart really, really quickly. So the Christians are the ones kind of holding that back now. So anyway, so this is going to happen, and then he's going to sit in the temple and proclaim himself to be God. But now I want you to notice this. His first expedition, now I don't know if that's before or after this. It almost sounds like after that war, he gets in the temple, proclaims himself to be God, then he starts something, before or after. But his first expedition to go attack somebody, okay, in this scenario, his first expedition will be against Tyre and Beatrice. Now, if you look this up, this is the old Latin name, what the Romans called Beirut. So we're talking about Tyre and Beirut. So I think that's interesting. When we look at Obadiah, we find that by this time, Israel should control Tyre easily. It should be Israeli territory. Southern Lebanon ends up being occupied by, or not, I shouldn't say occupied, but become Israeli territory. Zidon does not. It's still Lebanon. And so Tyre is in there, but Beirut's even further up. Beirut's the capital at this point anyway. I don't know if it was back in Roman times. But isn't that interesting? So his first expedition against Tyre and Beirut and the surrounding territory. So that's pretty interesting. If you look at a map of Lebanon and look at where Beirut is and where Tyre is and that surrounding area, it always makes me wonder, you know, when the Antichrist starts coming over, he's going to make treaties with people, and a lot of people are just going to surrender, and that's fine. And then the people that don't like him are going to balk, and he's going to attack them in different ways. So out of all the things that are the problem, he doesn't attack the United States. At first anyway, he doesn't attack Russia or Germany or Syria or wherever, you know, but he attacks Beirut, Lebanon. And you got to ask why. Now, again, this is a church father, so he might be confused, but it is really interesting to see things through his eyes. We would agree with at least 90% of this, and this is the new stuff. It's like, okay, so 3 of the 10 that rebel against the Antichrist, they don't like him. And notice what that would be if that's the case. It's Egypt, Libya, and either Sudan and or Ethiopia. That's the African bloc. So it's like the Middle East kind of goes along with whatever's going along. And Africa says, no, we don't do that. You come over here, we'll kill you. You know, we will go to war. So it's interesting. It's because every country or set of countries have different attitudes. The West thinks one way, the East thinks another way, Russia thinks another way. And so you've got these different ideas on colonialism, on kings, on people's rights, just different things like that. So now he says, for by storming these cities first, and the cities, of course, are Beirut and Tyre, by storming these cities first, he will strike terror into the heart of the others, as Isaiah says. So that's new to me. There's a quote, a prophecy out of Isaiah about the Antichrist attacking Beirut. That's interesting. Now, I'm not saying, again, this is the tribulation period. We're not there yet. So any war that starts between Israel and Lebanon is part of the Obadiah prophecy, not this one. But I just want you to be focused on Beirut is in prophecy, Tyre is in prophecy, Seraphon, or the Litani River, is in prophecy, southern Lebanon is in prophecy. So is the Negev, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, which is called Bashan. And most of these things, you just got to look up the old names and see what we're talking about. So this is what Isaiah says about this, according to Hippolytus. Isaiah 23 verses 4 and 5 are specifically about the time of the Antichrist attacking Beirut and the other. So it says, be thou ashamed, O Zidon, the sea hath spoken, even the strength of the sea has spoken, saying, I travailed not, nor brought forth children, neither did I nurse up young men or bring up virgins. But when the rampart comes to Egypt, pain shall seize them for Tyre. So this is talking about, and this is interesting, if he's plugging this in correctly, it's the time when the Antichrist goes to war with 3 of the 10, destroys them. And the whole thing starts by striking fear into everybody's hearts by him attacking Lebanon. So that's really interesting. So if he is a king of a north, and that's a whole nother set of prophecies, not here, but if he is the king of a country north of Israel, whatever that is, then we can see if he's going to end up coming into Israel, taking it over, setting in the temple, proclaiming himself to be God. Lebanon is right there in the midst of it. So when you're starting out, remember when Hitler started out in 1938, the first thing he did is not invade a large company. He simply invaded Austria. And of course, that was specifically, there was a one unit thing. He sent troops specifically to, I forget the name of it, the museum that housed the Spear of Destiny. It's an occult object, specifically to grab that and take it back to Germany. That was it. And then there was some other strange things going on. But at that point, that was technically when the war started and we're taking part of something. And everybody basically just said, no, they lost so much territory, let's just kind of ignore it. And they didn't do anything right immediately. And that's the thing. We do want to use diplomacy and try to not have wars. Totally agree with that. But there are times when if you act quickly, it would be better. Of course, the Lord used that World War II to have the nation of Israel 3 years after the war was over to finally be formed. But anyway, so this is interesting. So, and then it talks about other things the Antichrist doing. So basically, I just wanted to share these two things with you. So Beirut and Tyre are the first to fall to the Antichrist, and it's connected with Jordan working with the Antichrist, or falling diplomatically or giving up or whatever. And then this war at that time period is also connected. I was talking to Bill Salas about Psalm 83, and he was talking about how in Psalm 83 it talks about the children of Lot, are part of that group. And I was showing him that one of the church fathers was connecting that to the time of the Antichrist. And it was interesting. He says, oh, no, I think it's way before that. And I was saying, well, you're not getting the spirit of this. So you've got people telling you that Psalm 83 was over a long, long time ago. And you're saying it's not completely over yet. And we got a church father that may or may not be 100% correct, but he's more in agreement with you than he is with the other guys who are saying it's over. So you're saying it's not quite over, but it probably will be by the time of the Antichrist. This guy says it's still there going on when the Antichrist comes. So it's kind of, he's more in your boat than the other guy's boat. Again, no way to prove this is 100% accurate or disprove it until it actually happens. But this is why I love studying church fathers, because everything that they teach in general is exactly what we've been taught. Premillennialism, pre-trib rapture, Antichrist, 7-year tribulation period, all that stuff. But at the same time, they throw in things like this. And he gets this from Daniel and from Isaiah, and I can see how he's putting it together. I would have just never have thought Isaiah 11 had anything to do with the Antichrist in that sense. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I would love to be able to talk to him and say, okay, it looks great, it does fit. Who on earth, or not on earth, who told you this is connected this way? I would love to hear him say, Peter and John said this is a standard interpretation, or whatever. Or I don't know, it's just my personal opinion. I'd just love to hear him say that one way or the other. Well, we're going ahead and stop there for tonight. I just wanted to share those two things with you. I'm going to try to, and I guess I'm doing about the same time period, but I'm going to try to limit the teaching to a half an hour. And probably when we start our studies, I'm going to try to break them up and do a study by itself and probably upload it sometime during the week, and then have our Q&As on Monday over that and other subjects. So same basic stuff, but sometimes if I talk an hour and a half to 2 hours, I start getting hoarse. And if I'm already having allergy problems, then, so I needed to kind of limit that. But I have no problem talking for a half an hour or something every day, even just all together like that. So we will get on this. I think it's going to be fun. Again, we won't be here next week because of the new addition to the family. You can let me know also what you think as far as, and I don't think I put the comments on. I can turn it on for a short time, but if you like the idea of having the second channel just for text, and we could probably put the Bible in there too. So we'd have the Bible read and the text, the scrolls read, and it's going to take some time. But I would like a one-stop shop for all of the scrolls that we know are, we believe are legit, that don't contradict Scripture. So you can go there and see that there's no Gospel of Mary or that kind of a thing. So a safe place for us to look at church fathers, Dead Sea Scrolls, and that like. So, okay, let me go over to the chat room. I was in the chat room. There we go. And we'll go through and look at some of these. Looks like we've got 3 people that became members, angel level. Thank you very much, guys, for supporting us. We also have our support through Give, Send, Go, which you can click on that and see. And then we also have our network that we kind of put up. So thank you very much for helping us out there and being a part of our family. Typo correction book by Ignatius. Is there one? Something with a spiritual in the title. I'm not sure. There's, I think there are 7 works that Ignatius did that are considered legitimate. And those are pretty cool, actually. There's another 7 that people think are fake. I don't know of anything that has spiritual in the title. Most of his works are just simply to someone, to Polycarp, to John, to Rome. And then there's like a handful of others. I don't think he wrote to Corinth, but he wrote to a handful of churches in that area. So don't know about that exactly. Even though Melchizedek has other meanings, the first appearance to Abraham could be nothing else but a christophany. Your thoughts? Well, we actually wrote a book on the Melchizedekian order. And a good half or close to half of the book is all the 4 or 5 chapters in Hebrews. And the whole idea when it says that he is without father, without mother, without genealogy, without end of days or beginning of life, it very clearly goes on, though, 2 or 3 verses down, and says the Melchizedek that blessed Abraham had a genealogy and a different genealogy than what Levi had. And that seems to be a contradiction. So what we're seeing is actually we're talking about the orders. Levi, to be a Levitical priest, you have to have proper descent from mother and father, has to be of the tribe of Levi. You can't start until you're trained, and you can't be trained until you're 25. So you start as a priest at 30, and there's a mandatory retirement at the age of 50 or 60. I think it's 50. And so that's just the way that works on that. So the Melchizedekian priest, he's saying there are no such laws connecting it. Otherwise, Jesus, if he was a Levitical priest, would have had to give the priesthood up to someone else when he became 50, which was about 2,000 years ago. So what we're talking about is contrasting the priesthoods. And he's talking to the Jews in the temple, trying to show that Jesus is actually superior to the Sabbath, the law of Moses, even superior to Moses. He's even superior to the priesthood in general, because he's a Melchizedekian priest instead of a Levitical priest. And he's explaining all the laws and stuff. So I used to think it was a Christophany, but we have the old records that tell us that the Melchizedekian priest that blessed Abraham was actually Shem, the son of Noah. And so we have, I think there's been like 10 Melchizedekian priests throughout time. And then Jacob broke up the Melchizedekian priesthood and created the Levitical one out of it. And then the parts were reunited when John the Baptist baptized Jesus into ministry. So he was already born king from the lineage of Judah, being baptized by the person who should have been the real high priest into the priesthood. And then immediately the Holy Spirit anointed him, which is the prophet part. So that put all three pieces back. Long story, but that's basically what it means. So we have that in our, let me go back to our bookstore. We have this one here, Ancient Order of Melchizedek. Would explain a lot of that stuff from the Dead Sea Scrolls, from the early writings, Jewish writings, and those things. It's a good question, though. Please, I was reviewing the letters to the churches of Revelation 3 and looked up the word deeds and works. The word is Strong's Greek 2041, which means a business, employment, not as other works for God. Please help. Okay, let me look it up real quick. And let us go. I was looking at Obadiah too. We need to revisit that. But Revelation 3, the word for deeds and works, Greek. Okay, let me flip over to that. So, and let's see, I'm not sure what verse that was in. Okay, here's works 2041. There you go. Okay. Ergon. Okay. Meaning to work or toil, by implication to act, deed, doing, labor, or work. That's my Strong's anyway. So if I go over to my dictionaries and flip over, let me look at there. Business, employment, that which one may be occupied, something that someone undertakes to do, an enterprise, an undertaking, any product of water, or whatsoever, rather. Industry, act, okay. So when we go back to here, let me get it so I can see it easier. I don't see what the problem is, basically, but the church is supposed to be doing its job, its employment, its work, which is doing the will of the Lord. And most of these churches, not all of them, but most of these churches got off doing something else. And in some cases, it was doing really good things, just not what they were supposed to do. So it's really important in that. You might ask if there's any more to it, let me know, but let's see here. Is Jasher a real ancient book? Yeah, it's at least 2,000 years old. There's no way for us to absolutely prove any particular book is the original, or if it is the original, that it has or has not been altered or anything like that. The history for that, or the legends, is that it goes back to the Sephardic Jews. The Sephardic Jews, which are the Spanish Jews, are the ones that say it took that and other books from the temple before the temple was destroyed. It's back in the days of Josephus, so around 70 AD. So it goes way back to that point. Now, there are rabbis that will quote the book in the 1st century AD. So if it's a made-up book, it's got to be, sometime before Christ, in the BC time period. If it is the book, it's supposed to be, it should be about 1500 BC. So there could very easily be typos in it, or not typos, but I mean extra things somebody wrote or rewrote. It's always a possibility. But we have our own version of the book of Jasher. I think we have it. Here we go, right here. And it's really interesting to me because it has about 3 times the amount of history as Genesis. So when you're reading Genesis and you've got the 2 guys or the certain city, or they went over here, there's probably more information to it. So you can look all that stuff up. Very fascinating. When I read Jasher, one of the things that really stood out to me the first time I read it was the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. As a teenager, I read that and I thought, well, bad guys need to be wiped out, but what about the women and the children? And if you're going to send fire down and destroy everything, men, women, children, dogs, cats, cattle, every living creature just totally destroyed. It seems a little harsh. That was my attitude. So then in Jasher, I read the story of the government structure. I think it's got five pages of the government structure and all the different things that they did. And I began to realize that place was extremely wicked. I would have wiped them out a long time before that. So I went from being too merciful to too vicious, so to speak, and just by reading a little bit. So it taught me that when you see the Lord doing something and you think he's too merciful or he's too judgmental or something like that, it basically just means that you don't know the whole story. Because you and I have a God nature in us. If you really knew all the details, we would all make the same decision. Let this guy go and punish that guy, and we would give him the proper punishment. It would just be but we never know the whole story. So, very fascinating book for me. Super chat, $100. Thank you very much. Again, we really appreciate all the donations through here and Give, Send, Go and PayPal and stuff. And appreciate you buying the books and giving them out to people. And appreciate you guys being here in the study with the questions. Did Jesus' acts of healing on the Sabbath, in which he actually only spoke, actually violate the Jewish Sabbath law, or were they stretching it to try to find something against him? They were stretching it. There are several things in the law that they would take out of context. And basically, we still do that today. We have hyper Hebrew roots groups that take it too far. There are moral laws that we all have to obey. There are laws specifically for priests. None of us are supposed to be building a temple, sacrificing animals, anything like that. That's priestly stuff, only for the descendants of Levi, period. There's a Sanhedrin, and they have special laws to make sure they don't, supposedly, they don't kill innocent people, because they're the ones that are supposed to be putting people to death. A government structure, court system. You and I, unless we're elected to be a part of the Sanhedrin, are not part of that. So those laws don't apply to us. We don't have powers to kill people, that kind of thing. So there's all these different things. You can go in and give a sacrifice or an offering in the temple if you're a Jewish male. When you have a son, there's a totally different ritual that the woman has to do for giving birth. So that's another example. It's like guys don't give birth, women don't father children, except I guess in today's, never mind. But the whole point is that there's different laws like that, and these guys would take them way out of context. So this whole concept of not working on the Sabbath, the example that was given in the scriptures and in the other manuscripts is if you have a donkey or a calf or something that falls into a pit, or even a human being that falls into the pit, would you not break the Sabbath? Forget about going to church. Somebody's in trouble. We got to save them. Their whole concept is that if you got up in the morning, went and found that your calf or whatever fell into a pit, broke its neck, and it's dead, you don't need to do anything with it right now. You need to get to church. As soon as you get out of church or synagogue, you need to fix that, bury it or whatever. However, if it's still alive, you don't wait, because it will die. So you go ahead. So there's this big debate, and Jesus even mentioned that one about, well, when your calf falls into a pit, don't you break the Sabbath? And, and some of them were saying, no, we don't. Like, you're misunderstanding the law. If it's dead, you don't. If it's alive, you do. Is it lawful to kill or save a life on the Sabbath? That's what he's talking about. If you could save a life, you save a life. And even in the law of Kings, it made it very clear you're not supposed to eat pork. And Jews are not supposed to eat pork. They're not supposed to drink wine that's made by Gentiles, because it could be connected with paganism or whatever. But if you're in a campaign in a war situation and you run out of food, and the only food there is pork and wine and stuff from Gentiles, you go ahead and eat it. There's nothing wrong with the food. It's actually good food, the text even says. But Jews are not supposed to eat that because of religious symbolism, what it means. And the breaking of a Sabbath or a holy day is the same thing. You would never start a war on Yom Kippur or on Passover. Those are holy days. However, if you're attacked, you break that Sabbath. You know, and Jesus even used the whole idea about the teachers in the synagogue. That's what they do. That's their job. So your pastor's job, for instance, is to stand up on Sunday morning and preach. It'd be really stupid if you'd say, well, the pastor doesn't go to church somewhere on Sunday morning and sit and listen to someone teach. So if he doesn't, I don't have to. It's like, that's his job. But that's the kind of perversion that they were doing on him consistently. The same way, like when they were eating in the cornfield. It's like, why don't you tell them, you know, they're not supposed to do this. They're not supposed to pick corn on the Sabbath. They're not supposed to do this. It's like that specific law, and you'd have to have all the laws memorized and know which pieces they go to. That was for priests. The Jesus disciples are not priests. They're followers. They're in a cornfield. They're not in the temple doing rituals. They're in a cornfield. Let them eat something before they starve to death. It's not hard to understand. The reason they're there in the cornfield to begin with is that they're following Jesus. They're actually studying more than you and I put together. So leave them alone. So there's lots of things like that. So yeah, they were just trying to find something against him to do that. And you can go back to the time before the law of Moses, like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Esau and things like that they would do. So really interesting. Sadly, on the 27th, I saw Israel had the biggest attack since the 7th of October on that day. Do you think it's connected? And will there be more of this as we get closer to the end of this age? Yeah, there should be. I would think before the end of the age, all those prophecies would be fulfilled. So Gaza, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Golan Heights, colonizing of the Negev, several things like that going on. And one of the things I think is interesting that I always look for is whenever you have strong leaders, specifically in America, that are pro-Israel, everything dies down and they have a time of peace and they can go out and dig in the dirt and find scrolls. And whenever there's war that's imminent, you can't do that. And that's the situation they've been in the last 4 years. Nobody dared digs at all, period. When Trump was in office, he basically said, it's your land, go do what you want. And Cave 12 was found. So, and I'm still waiting for the text analysis from the fragments in Cave 12. But they found them and they're safe, you know. So those kind of things. And I'm waiting for a time when things will calm down and they start digging and hopefully find stuff. We know where there are certain things, not sure exactly what things are there, but we know because you can do scans. You just can't dig. And there are certain places where there are objects or containers of something. And so it'd be really interesting to see those things. The amount of Dead Sea Scrolls and other writings that we've got, amazing. And I'm ready for the rest of them. And I really do believe we'll eventually find them. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of those things. And probably in the coming weeks, we're going to see some really interesting things. Super sticker, $19. Thank you very, very much. Really appreciate that. $10. Thank you very much. Most hyper-charismatics insist that New Testament prophecy is not mandated to be 100% accurate. Yeah. I believe I know how you stand on this, but can you elaborate? Can you recommend one of your books on this? I don't think I have anything specific on that. If I do, it would probably be, if it's in there, ancient church fathers, because what they would be teaching on those kind of things. But basically, a prophet is always 100% accurate. Sometimes demonic prophets are too. The Old Testament talks about if there's a prophet that predicts something and what he says does not come to pass, you don't need to fear him. If what he says comes to pass, you know there's something supernatural there. But if he then says, let's go serve other gods, the Lord's testing you. He's allowed that to happen to see whether you're going to be faithful or not. So you still don't pay any attention to him. It doesn't say don't fear him, because there's something real or demonic with that guy. So you need to, leave him alone. So that's the whole concept in that. In the other thing that goes along with that, in Ezekiel 13 and 14, it talks about how there are people that prophesy out of the imagination of their heart. So there's con artists that'll tell you what they think you want to hear just to get money out of you. So that's one thing. That's a con artist. But there's actually people that honestly believe the Lord's talking with them. And some of those people are crazy. Some of them, the Lord is talking to them. But others, like what Ezekiel's talking about, are people that honestly believe the Lord's talking with them. He's not. They're getting these feelings or these thoughts, and they're trying to put something together. Or maybe they have a dream, but it's not from the Lord. And so the interesting thing to me about it is he's talking about these people. And at the end of the chapter, he says the punishment for the false prophet and the punishment for those that inquire of them shall be one and the same. Now, to me, that's amazing, because if there's no way for me to tell if you're a prophet or not, I best be paying attention, is my thought. But if I'm going to get in trouble for following you, then that's not fair, unless there is an easy way for me to tell if you're a false prophet or not. That makes sense? So in other words, when you look at this, there should be ways for us to understand that. And this concept of, I think the Lord's talking to me, and I think he said I'm supposed to go to Walmart and eat a ham sandwich. I think he says this. That's something that you're making up out of the imagination of your heart. So if a prophet gives you things, he needs to be 100% accurate. And that's always been the line of demarcation. So, and that's the way we, now in the Calvary Chapel circles, we'll still go to each other and say, I have this bad feeling, and I think you really shouldn't do this, and I think the Lord's leading me to tell you this. Maybe he is, maybe he's not, but I have this bad feeling, and I wanted to tell you that you should or should not do something. And I'll take that with a grain of salt, but also under advisory, especially if I get 2 or 3 people come and tell me that, there's probably something amiss somewhere. I've misunderstood or didn't describe it right, or I'm getting ready to do something I shouldn't. So we need to help each other. But the whole concept of being a prophet is one thing that you got to be very, very careful with that. So, and prophets should be able to prove themselves. Super sticker, $20 donation. Thank you very much. Okay. Excuse me. Let's see. Where were Cain? Let's see. What people were Cain afraid of if he was one of the first people? I'd have to know what verse or what you're talking about specifically. Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. Basically, the people that came after him, they had kids, and there's no reason to assume that a woman wouldn't give birth to a child at least. Maybe they did or did not have triplets or whatever, but at least a child in a 9-month period. So when you have, especially when you have multiple wives, like some of them did back then, but when you live, instead of living to 50 and then going through menopause, if you were to live to be 500, 600, 800, 900 years old, maybe going through menopause at 500. You can think about that. One person, instead of having a maximum of 5 or 10 kids, could have 50 or 100. And each one of those could have 50 or 100. And each one of those could have 50 and 100. So you're going to have a lot of people. You could have a lot of people very quickly. We don't know that that's what happened, that it was different or not. But I think that's what Cain is talking about. Cain said, people will try to kill me to avenge Abel. The godly people will try to hunt me down. And if he was a mass murderer and continued to do that, he would be hunted down. That would be lawful. And so the Lord said, since this is, starting off, you're going to have a mark, and nobody touched Cain. And we don't know what that mark was either. But yeah, a lot of times we forget about that. He might have been one of the first. Maybe there was only 3 people on the planet at that time. But in 100 years or 200 years or so, that would not be the case. Now, he did get killed accidentally, according to Genesis 4 or 5, anyway, by Lamech, after he married Ada and Zillah. So this is like 5 or 6 generations down. So at the very least, you're going to have somebody grow up to be 30 or 60 or 100, somewhere in that neighborhood, and then have a child, a generation, who would take 30 or 40 or 50 years or whatever to grow up. So you're talking at least 200-300 years later. And then there would be a good amount of people. So, and that's when he gets killed, at least in the 500s, if not in the 900s. Some of the texts talk about it being about the time that Adam died. So around the 900s. Super chat, $5. Thank you very much. Thank you for this live stream and your books. The readers on your audiobooks are excellent. Thank you. Yeah, we're still working on the last one, which is this one here, Ancient Prophecies from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's out in paperback and Kindle, and we're about a quarter of the way through. The readers are working on it. Fantastic guys. And so hopefully that'll get done in another month or so. And that's the only one that we don't have. All the rest of these have their audiobooks. But thank you. Are there any specific prophecies concerning Syria attacking the upper Galilee area or the Golan Heights in these modern times? Yes. Micah chapter 5 talks about there's a time, and there might be other people involved also, but specifically a war where Syria and Israel are battling, and after the battle, once it's all said and done, one side loses or gains more territory in the area of the Golan Heights, which is between Syria and Israel. That type of a situation happens 8 times between the time of the second return of Israel, which was 1948, and the second return of the Messiah to start the kingdom. So that's from Micah chapter 5. So that's a really interesting set of prophecies. That's another one that we need to focus on pretty heavily when we do our prophecy studies. So the Galilee area would come on down from that. There are things about Galilee, and then specifically over east of Galilee. I don't know how far that would go, is Gilead. And there's a prophecy about Gilead also doing different things. So there are a few, and those are all in Scripture. What do the 10 kings who have not received a kingdom yet mean? But they receive authority with the beast for 1 hour. If they belong to countries, are they upstarts grabbing at power? Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think any of us know for sure, but it says that the kingdom is Rome, and Rome splits into 2 sides, which that obviously happened. It was Western Rome, and which fizzled for 400 years and then became the Holy Roman Empire. And then you've got the Byzantine Empire, which morphed into the Ottoman Empire. Those were both destroyed in 1917, basically, and then tried to revive themselves in World War II. But then there are other things connected with it. But anyway, long story short, at the end of this, Daniel's vision of the legs, and then there's the 10 toes made of iron and clay. So it's partially from that old Roman Empire and partially from the clay empire, which is a different one. But they mingled together, which almost is impossible to do. And so that idea is that these receive power for 1 hour. So they form some sort of a democratic type thing or some sort of alliance between the countries. But for whatever reason, they just don't live up to standards. It just doesn't work. When the Antichrist takes over, he rules them with a rod of iron, and it will work one way or the other. And so then they become kings ruling with him for 1 hour is simply an idiom meaning a very short time. And it's the 7-year period, actually, or actually the 3.5 years. So they may be up to the people. The actual rulers might be placed in there, especially like the 3 that he deposes. He might either take over the territory, but no matter what he does, he'd have to put somebody in power to run it for him in that area. That's about all we know, all that I know for sure. How do we know, or how do you know the rock Canaan discovered after the flood contained instructions about the genetic manipulation? It's mentioned in the book of Jubilees that specific event happened. And then the information on how to do the genetic manipulation is mentioned in a Dead Sea Scroll called the Book of Giants. Now, I don't know that those two are directly connected, but the information is the same. One story says he went there, he found this stuff, he tried to emulate it, follow directions. Next thing you know, there's giants in the land of Canaan. And then that sounds nice, but we don't have the actual records. Well, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have those records. And when you look at them, knowing what we do about genetics, it's not like a piece of fiction that's written. The way it's written in the scrolls is very specific. So we've got videos in the Enoch playlist about the Book of Giants. And then also we have in our Book of Enoch here, it's a back chapter, because the Book of Giants is only like, well, it's fragmented. It's probably like 3, 4, 5 pages. It's the little bitty thing. But it's enough to give you the information on how you start doing genetic tampering. What source tells about Canaan's connection to Nimrod? That would be, it's probably connected from a lot of things. Jasher gives us the history of the wars and how it started. Jubilees tells us that Canaan went up, founded Zidon, and then went to Mount Hermon and found the records and quietly started doing things. And we know he didn't go back home. The Canaanites developed in the land. During that same time period, the scripture tells us about the Nimrod wars in the Tower of Babel. Jasher also at that point tells us that Nimrod went up with 500 men to battle in a skirmish with the sons of Japheth. And then he kind of swept in this way. And then there's the testament of Noah that tells us that Noah had a dream of being invaded from 2 sides. And these 2 sides would form a apostate empire. And then, it kind of turns out it's Canaan and Nimrod. So there's actually quite a bit of information in several different places. So you'd have to look at Jubilees, Testament of Noah, Book of Jasher, and I'm forgetting a couple of others, but there's a few things like that. That's actually all a part of the post-flood history that I want to do sometime. I originally asked you guys if you wanted to do prophecy or post-flood Nephilim history. We'll end up doing them both sometime, but those are where that stuff comes from, some of the sources. Could the 10 kings without a kingdom be CEOs of large tech or other companies? That is, billionaires grabbing power. It's possible. Again, if you read Hippolytus, like what we just read, it's countries specifically at that point. But even, that could be wrong and it could be this. But even if he's right, right now, I don't think Egypt is a tech power. Maybe they are. I don't really know much. I've never been over there. But things change quickly, especially when, well, the tech support joke about them outsourcing to India, because you can buy the tech support people and pay them $2 an hour instead of $50 an hour. So that kind of stuff. So India, at one point, a very, very poor country, became the tech place to go to. So the tech industry basically revitalized India, or part of it anyway. So that could easily happen to Egypt or somewhere else too. So all those things I think we need to look at. We never need to argue about them. Even if you're totally wrong or I'm totally wrong, we still need to look at all the possibilities. And right now we're still guessing, but maybe in 2 or 3 years, we'll know for sure, because one of those will happen, or one of them will become impossible. One of them is absolutely can't happen. And then we'll know the other one. So that's, there's been several things like that, either the EU or the G10 or G5, or, you know, one of those things expanding, or tech companies or whatever. So that's always a possibility. The thing that we always need to remember, I remember my dad talking about if a government messed up, it was fairly easy to go fix it if a bunch of people actually did it. And then he was saying right now there's too many things. Back when he was a kid, they didn't know about fingerprints. I'm dating myself. But anyway, or didn't know much about them. There was no DNA evidence, all that kind of stuff. So today there's all this extra stuff where there's no way you can not figure something out if there's enough manpower on it and technology. And the thing that we don't realize is that's true, but if half of the people, that's what a civil war is, half of the people don't want something, the half of the people that don't want it may also include half of the military, half of the police force, half of the politicians. And so that's how things still happen. And again, as Christians, we need to be peaceful, but resist any kind of tyranny or invasion of privacy, because that's where that stuff kind of starts. We need to embrace computers like we're doing here. We need to use it for preaching the gospel, TV, radio. Don't give it to the enemy, but also do what you can to make it godly. So yeah, there might be something like that. The whole idea about the Antichrist coming to power on the back of the harlot, which is the false religious system, and the false religious system is the one that fornicates with the kings of the earth, so controls all the commerce. So you're talking about billionaires grabbing power with their money. Well, that's, at that time, would be part of the harlot system. Not that they are, but the system would be running the money and the goods and everything. So it's going to wind up being connected with it at least. When is the sixth seal opened? I would say sometime in the beginning of the tribulation period. I know there's a lot of people that talk about the seals actually being opened now or a few years ago, or stuff like that. They connect it with viruses or certain wars or certain groups or whatever. And I still believe the way most of the church fathers and the way I was taught is that the first seal is the Antichrist coming to power. And then he does the wars that he does, and that's the wars and the famine, the pestilence, the destruction by the animals, and the 3 martyrdoms, the 3 waves of persecution, that kind of stuff. So I think that's all inside the tribulation period. In Revelation 13, a beast rises up out of the sea, and another beast comes up out of the earth. If in the Bible the sea refers to Gentile nations, what do you think the earth refers to? Probably Israel. Now that's Greek, but Hebrew, it would be the word eretz, which means land. And it can mean the dirt in my backyard, the land of Israel, the entire globe. It could be anything like that. And so I think it's interesting because it says in Revelation that the sea is the Gentile powers, the nations. And the Dead Sea Scrolls define it a little bit further. It's all of the nations under the control of Rome. And that doesn't necessarily mean pagan Rome or Roman Catholic, but it's some sort of a Roman Empire. It's those 2 legs we were talking about, the empire of such. So, but yeah, if it's all the Gentiles, when you talk about Gentiles, you're always talking about Gentiles or Jews, and then because it's a religious term. So if those are all Gentile nations, the only thing left would be Israel. So that makes me think that the land beast is referred to as probably the false prophet. So the false prophet is in Israel somewhere. And this doesn't mean anything pro or anti-Israel or Jews or anything, but if the Antichrist is going to sit in a rebuilt temple and proclaim to be God, and then his false prophet, his pope, so to speak, or his whatever, is going to proclaim him to be God, he would have to be in Israel also. So it's that kind of stuff. I think it's basically talking about all the nations coming against Israel and Israel being the focal point. But there could be a lot more to it than that. Jeremiah became a member. Thank you very much again for supporting us and being part of the chat. Any Essene commentary on women as elders or preachers? No, there wouldn't be back at that time period. They did have, in the Damascus covenant, it talks about women, children, men, and then some people are celibate, some people have families, some people live in the commune or out, in the Essene community. Other people, study and they have those beliefs, but they live in the regular cities and have businesses and live normal lives. So you can be in Essene and be married or single, have kids, not have kids, live in the city or live out in the country. Or what the thing, it's like us as Christians. We all have different walks of life, but the thing that holds us together is the study of Scripture. It'd be the same thing with them. But women, well, there's no really elders or preachers. The closest thing you can get to that is Paul when he talks about the older women teach the younger women, and the older men teach the younger men. It's the way it needs to be with some subjects, anyway. Could the Antichrist attack Beirut and Tyre because they are occupied by Israel at that time? If the Obadiah prophecy is fulfilled already, they would occupy Tyre, so that would be a definite thing. But Sidon remains Lebanon, and Beirut, of course, is north of there and is the capital. So at that point, they wouldn't control Beirut or Sidon, but they would Tyre. So it's not just anyway because Israel is occupying southern Lebanon. That might be part of it. But there's something else going on in Lebanon proper, because Lebanon stays its own thing. It just loses the tip, the southern part of Lebanon. So that's something to think about, though. It might have a play in it. See, that's what's cool. We need to put all these ideas together and somebody will help us figure it out. How would I find if the book that Ignatius supposedly wrote called Spiritual Exercises? Oh, I'm sorry, okay. I'm thinking of Church Father Ignatius. You're talking about Ignatius de Loyola, who wrote Spiritual Exercises. I glitched, sorry. Yeah, it is I actually have never read it, but it's a Roman Catholic thing. It's supposed to be something that you don't want to get into. They had the Desert Fathers, which is a mixture of Christianity and Gnosticism. Started out in Egypt and was brought back to Europe. We have a book that talks about a little of that history, which is Gnostic Origins of Roman Catholicism, and talks a little bit about the Desert Fathers and how that kind of stuff started. But yeah, it doesn't say anything about the Spiritual Exercises because he came along later. Yeah, searching on YouTube is not the most reliable. I agree. I would just stay away from it. It's not that it's Catholic per se, but it's medieval, not even medieval, but it's early Catholic in that train of the Desert Fathers, which is Gnostic, heavily influenced with Gnostic stuff. And I don't know for sure what all's in it because I've never read the Spiritual Exercises. But I do know quite a bit about the Gnostic stuff. Thank you for clarifying that, or we would have never got that far. Revelation 3:1, 3:8, and 3:15. I'm asking if works or deeds is my behavior at my job. job, represents God, not me trying to do spiritual works, for example, to evangelize. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. I think it could. I think it's a broader term than that. The church itself has a job to do and supposed to be doing it. But the only way that could happen is if you and I are members of the church and we're doing what our gifts are, what we're called to do. And that doesn't mean that you're supposed to be doing something that you're uncomfortable or not good at. The whole concept is that God gives you a spiritual gift. And if you have a gift for evangelism, the Lord would just work through you and it would work. So, and we're always supposed to have good behavior anyway. It can be very difficult. I remember when I worked for Sprint, my supervisor called up and he said, well, how do you do the Christian stuff? He was Christian, but he was trying to do his job. And I said, I think everybody knows that I'm a Christian, but I'm here to do the work and to make money. That's my job here. That's what I want to do. So I don't bring up religion. However, everybody knows I am a Christian. They see me praying, or I've got a Bible on my desk, and stuff like that. They are more than welcome to come and ask questions. So if they ask questions, I'll be glad to answer them. But other than that, I don't bring it up. And he was very pleased with that. And I said, however, realize one thing though, if you come up to a Christian and say, I'm a Christian, but I believe this, and that's not Christian, I have a responsibility to correct a brother. Okay, and I don't know if they're a brother or not, but they said they were a Christian and they believe that they should, murder somebody or something. That's not what Christians do. So I can't not say anything. That's part of my religious duty. So at that point, you need to let them know that if they bring something up that's wrong, they will have to, I can't. And to fire me for that would be religious discrimination. So we got to learn to get along, but it's not all on me. It's also on them. You can't sit there and say, I'm a Christian, and then just cuss up a storm. I have to correct you, so, which was okay. Cause at that time in Sprint, that would be inappropriate, activity. But yeah, so it can be very hard. I have not been in that world, in the tech world in that sense, in probably 20 years or better. So, but hopefully that helps. What messianic prophecies will the Antichrist copy to validate himself as God's chosen one? Well, the texts talk about him proclaiming to be the Messiah, the Holy One of God, the Son of God. Paul talks about him being God incarnate, or saying that he's God sitting in the temple, which the Messiah is God incarnate, so that's fine. So I don't know of anything else per se. Some people have tried to say he'll probably try to say he's virgin born, whether that's true or not. I mean, you can always fake your birth certificate, like some people have done, and to get into politics, so to speak, or be king or whatever he is, president, prime minister, crown prince, or whatever. And then other people have tried to say that he might start his ministry when he's 30 to mimic Jesus, things like that. But I don't know of any specific thing that says that. The only texts that talk about is that he claims to be God, he claims to be Messiah, claims to be the Son of God. Will there be a connection between the Antichrist head wound and his true colors beginning to show? Probably. If that's something that happens in the middle of the tribulation period, that very well could be too. And sometimes we all know that head trauma can cause you to be goofy, but sometimes it doesn't bother you as far as your ability to be smart and do things, but it can make you very passive, or maybe make you very mean. Something like alcohol does that too. Some people do one, some people do the other. So a head wound, there's no telling what exactly might happen. Might make it easier to be possessed also. How close do you believe we are to the rapture? I pray that it's soon. I don't know for sure. I think the rapture might happen at any time. So it could be like tonight. It could be, I would guess it would be in the last Jubilee or the last generation. But that starts in a year and a half. Wait, is it a year and a half? Yeah, a year and a half. I would have guessed all the prophecies would start in the last generation, a year and a half from now. But we've already seen a couple of them start. So it's pretty interesting. So I honestly don't know. I hope it's soon also. Do you have any thoughts about them saying that they found the tomb of Gilgamesh? I've heard that stuff, but I really don't know anything about it. One of the things that I've learned is when you hear that stuff, there's probably something to it. And maybe it actually is Gilgamesh, or they think it's Gilgamesh and it's someone else or whatever. I'm sure they found something. And there's all these different theories and stuff. But unless you actually go there and see stuff, that's interesting. One of the guys on here, Chris, got to interview somebody that supposedly is an eyewitness of not Gilgamesh per se, but other things like that. So I do encourage him to go ahead and get that DVD done. I think it'll be really interesting. But again, I wasn't there. So again, I've heard that stuff, but I don't know. As far as the text goes, though, there is a Gilgamesh character with a name almost identical to that in the Book of Giants. He was a Nephilim pre-flood giant. So when you take that and you mix it up a little bit in the Babylonian Chronicle, and the guy that controlled the country, the president, so to speak, would be Nimrod. But Nimrod takes the title of a pre-flood Nephilim. It's basically saying that he is a giant. And he may or may not have been, but it's you can see how all the legends come together, which obviously also means the Epic of Gilgamesh is not 100% accurate, but there are some other things in there. Wouldn't the 10-week prophecy in the Essenes invalidate the imminence of the rapture? 10-week prophecy. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure exactly which one you're talking about. There's Enoch's 10-week prophecy, the calendar. I guess it depends on how you look at it. So, like, for instance, when I say that the rapture happens after Israel comes back, we know that's sometime after 1948. So if I was to say that, I'd get in a lot of trouble for saying that if it was, 1900, because that would say, well, you don't believe in the imminency then, or imminency. So I'm not sure exactly how to take that. I think that the date for the rapture is set in stone. I think the Father knows it, maybe nobody else does. So I don't think that it would help necessarily to pray to speed it up or slow it down or anything. I think it's set. But I don't know when it is. And if I don't know when it is, then it could be at any time. And I think that's really the only thing that it means. So in the 10-week prophecy in Enoch's calendar system, which is slightly different than the Essene calendar one, it's not really different, but it's packaged differently. So instead of 14 unas, there are 10 weeks. A day being a century per thing like that. So anyway, the stuff that talks about it occurring into the week before the last week, in the 9th week. And so when you back up 10 whole days, 1,000 years, it's somewhere in that thing. There's other prophecies like in Ezra Apocalypse and a few others that seem to indicate it should be in the same century as Enoch's 10-week prophecy puts it, which is sometime between 1975 and 2075. And we don't think about that much because I guess that kind of invalidates imminency if you say, well, it couldn't have occurred until 1975. That's something that we see now. That's why I'm trying careful to say, well, there's something going on, and here's the prophecies, and I think we have it this way, until it actually happens. Then we can date it and know for sure. But again, imminence basically means we don't know for sure. So I don't think there's a problem with it. Some people could argue that, though. But it's just like me right now saying, I can guarantee you the rapture does not happen before 2023. Yeah, because that's historically perfect now. So I have a question for Dr. Ken. Is there a pre-flood and a post-flood pre-Moses canon? Thank you in advance. Nobody actually said there was, but the way that they venerated the testaments of the patriarchs, it makes it seem like there is. So Moses writes down a history of the Jews, really, really brief, from creation to his birth, and that's Genesis. And then Exodus is his birth and the Exodus from Egypt and that kind of stuff. So you've got the first 2,448 years, basically they're in Genesis and the first couple chapters of Exodus. So the Holy Spirit inspired him to write it, but I'm sure he had the written traditions and the written histories of his ancestors. And you can see that in the way that he writes it. For instance, when Judah was supposed to give Tamar to one of his sons because one son had died, and it's the sister-in-law clause. And it's like, that's just part of an ancient tradition, or a law system. So they had some of that stuff way back when. So there's got to be written codes and written history. So I know the Holy Spirit probably told him things that he didn't know and made sure he wrote it correctly. But it does seem to be like that. So many writings talk about prophets and the patriarchs from Adam to Aaron being prophets and writing prophetical or last will and testaments. So that in itself would become a kind of pre-Mosaic canon. And again, we're just now understanding this stuff. We don't know much about it. We understand that in the Armenian canon, Armenian or Syrian, maybe both, and one of the Eastern Orthodox canons had the testaments of the 12 patriarchs. And it just sounds too Christian. I remember asking my professor about it, could we use this to witness? And he's like, no, because the story is somebody found these in a cave in Judea, brought it to the patriarch. He considered it real. He translates it into Greek, adds it to their canon. And then the Hebrew version just kind of disappears. That's a nice story, but there's no evidence to prove any of that happened, So that means you can't, we studied it in seminary, but it's just like you can't use it to witness. Well, now pieces of those have been found in the Dead Sea Scrolls along with other testaments that were not those. So now we know the story at least is real. They very easily could have got them from caves in Judea because there were other parts of them in caves in Judea. So it's an interesting thing to look at. It's something that we need to look at really carefully. We don't want to add anything to the Old Testament or the New Testament, but we want to study the history of the intertestamental period so we understand the New Testament better and the prophecies, and then the patriarchal writings and that kind of stuff to understand the beginnings. I think when we miss certain things, it kind of garbles a lot of other things. There's no way, or is there a way to purchase your audiobooks without joining a monthly subscription to Amazon's audiobook club? I don't know for sure. There used to be. I heard somebody say something about you couldn't. My daughter was saying something about, let's see, what was it? Oh, she got something and wanted to return it, and they wouldn't let her return it unless she had a membership or something like that. So they change things from time to time. I like being able to do this, and I want to make money and everything, but to be perfectly honest, what I've seen is a lot of these subscription things, no matter what they tell you, it's a type of rent. So for instance, there's been, and I don't remember who, but I play around with Linux a little bit. I'm trying to get better at it and there's a lot of stuff going on in the computer world. Everybody wants to spy on you, at the very least to send you coupons so they make money, you save money. I understand that, and I would be cool with that if that's all that they're doing. But again, it's part of that resisting the spying, the Antichrist type stuff. But there's been several people and I forget what it was, somebody had a great big movie database and you bought them, but they were all stored up there. Well, that got sold to someone and it just got turned off. Well, but I bought those. No, technically you rented them. So the only way to make sure you have them would be to buy the CDs, the DVDs, the movies, to have them. Of course, if there's a fire and they melt, then you lose them. But same kind of a stuff. It's just something to think about. So that's a good idea. I'm not sure how to go about. We originally started making DVDs along with the books a long time ago, but then Amazon decided to get out of the business because everybody was streaming and there's no money in it for them. And so if I hired a company to do it, I'd have to have them make it and then store it somewhere and then ship it from here. And that got to be too much for me also. So the way the books work is the information is up there. And if you order one, it's print on demand. So they just print it within a day and then mail it to you. And they take out the printing cost and the mailing and their part, and whatever's left over, they send me at the end of the month as the author. So, but that would be good to do. Like I said, the closest thing we're doing, not my books, but the texts themselves, we're going to try to put them on YouTube. So we have a separate channel just for the text that you can listen to. But again, see, that's the same thing. Even if that's perfectly fine and the greatest ever, what happens if I get in trouble with YouTube, or even if they love me and they sell that to some other company that just turns it off? So there's always those options. That's why we always back up our data and everything. So I don't know for sure about that, but it is something to think about. Do you think that Jesus is going to touch the Mount of Olives in 2030 or 2030 or 2031? He will when he comes back. It's whenever the second coming is. That's a possibility. The Dead Sea Scrolls would seem to indicate the end of the age is 2075. They talk about 2,000-year ages. However, the church age, which might be different, started in 32, so it will end in 2032. So I think in 2030 to 32, going forward, we need to be really looking for stuff to happen. And when you think about Jesus starting his ministry in 28, 3.5 years before his crucifixion, basically you're talking about in the next 4 years, we should see some interesting things set up. Not necessarily the end or anything, but things have to start going toward the direction that prophecy dictates they will. So I don't know for sure, but it'll be interesting to see. Byzantine Empire was Christian. No, yes, it was Greek. So by that time, the empire had become Christian, and then Western Rome stayed with Latin, and the Eastern text, Byzantium, became what we consider Greek Orthodox, or the Orthodox Church, and everything was in Greek. So, but yeah, they were both Christian. They stayed. Now, I'm not saying everybody in it was Christian and saved or anything, but the empire or a nation can claim to be Muslim, Jewish, Christian, whatever, and maybe the nation is officially, but that doesn't mean the people in it necessarily are all that religion. But yeah, it was a Christian nation until 1453, when it was taken over by the Ottoman Empire. And then it would officially, of course, become Muslim, even though there's a lot of Christians there at that point. Okay, last question. Do you think New York is the new Babylon? It has a lot of characteristics of that. I'm looking at Babylon as being a religious system, rather controlling commerce. So in that sense, New York and other places might be headquarters for the commerce part, but we're looking at who actually controls it. And it would have to be some religious system. So Islam, Roman Catholicism, Chrislam, something else. In a sense, secularism is a type of religion. So there's something there that would do that. So I don't think New York as a city is Babylon is described as the religious commerce system. But I think it could be a part of it. So, okay, we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. Thank you for all the questions. Those things are pretty cool. Again, we won't be here next Monday, but we will in 2 weeks, and we're going to start doing those things. So let me know if you think that's a good idea, if you have suggestions or whatever. So thank you guys, and we'll talk to you next week.